On a mountain in northern Israel, 850 men screamed at the sky for 6 hours, and nothing answered. They had danced around a stone altar since morning. They had shouted the name of their God until their voices cracked. They had taken knives and swords and cut their own arms and chests until the blood ran down into the dust, because their prophets taught that pain would force heaven to listen. And still, hour after hour, the sky above them stayed blue and empty and silent. Then one man, standing alone against all of them, walked to a broken altar and asked the crowd to do something insane. He asked them to pour water on it, barrel after barrel, until the wood was soaked and the stones were dripping and a trench dug around the whole thing was filled to the brim. Then he said one short prayer. Not a scream, not a chant, just a few quiet sentences. And fire fell out of a cloudless sky and burned the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the water, and the very ground it stood on, until there was nothing left but a scar in the earth. Now, you've probably heard pieces of that story, maybe in a children's Bible, maybe on a felt board in a Sunday school room. But here's what almost nobody ever tells you. That mountain, that fire, and the terrified nation watching it happen are not a standalone miracle. They are the midpoint of a single unbroken tragedy. The story of how the richest, wisest, most envied kingdom on the face of the earth destroyed itself in the space of a few generations, from the inside, on purpose. And that entire story is written down in one book. A book most people have never actually read from beginning to end. A book they think is a collection of disconnected Sunday school lessons, when it is actually one of the darkest and most sophisticated political dramas ever recorded in the ancient world, the Book of First Kings. Over the next 2 hours, I'm going to walk you through the whole thing. Not the sanitized version, not the highlight reel, the actual text. And I promise you, by the time we reach the end, 3 things are going to happen. You'll understand why a kingdom that had everything threw it all away. You'll see how a single sentence, spoken by a forgotten prophet, took more than 50 years and a national catastrophe to come true, exactly as he said it would. And you'll find out what archaeologists dug out of the ground in the last century that proves these kings, these queens, and these wars were not legends at all. They were real. Their names are carved into the monuments of the empires that fought them. Jerusalem, about 100 years earlier. A night when this same kingdom stood at a height no nation in that part of the world had ever reached. The gold, the temple, the wisdom that kings crossed continents just to hear. And hidden inside that triumph on the very night it peaked were the exact seeds that would one day burn it all to the ground. Once you see how, you will never read this story the same way again. So let's go back to the Golden Age. And let's find the crack in the gold. To understand how high this kingdom fell, you have to understand how high it climbed first. And the numbers, even by the standards of the ancient world, are almost hard to believe. When Solomon became king of Israel, he inherited something his father David had spent a lifetime building: a unified nation. 12 tribes, once a loose scatter of herders and farmers and warlords, welded into a single state with one capital, one army, and one throne. David had conquered the enemies. Solomon inherited the peace, and into that peace he poured a level of wealth that turned a small nation on the edge of the desert into a superpower. The Bible says Solomon's kingdom stretched from the Euphrates River in the north all the way to the border of Egypt in the south. It says the surrounding kingdoms didn't invade, they paid. Every year, tribute flowed into Jerusalem in silver and gold, in horses and weapons, in spices and rare woods. Israel sat on the land bridge between 3 continents, the crossroads where every trade route between Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Arabia had to pass. And Solomon controlled the tolls. The text tries to describe the scale of it and almost gives up. It says that in Jerusalem, in the days of Solomon, silver was considered worth nothing, nothing. It was so common that nobody bothered to count it. Gold was the ordinary metal of the palace. His throne was ivory overlaid with gold. His drinking cups were gold. The shields of his guard were gold. When the Queen of Sheba traveled 1,000 miles to see if the rumors were true, the text says that when she saw it with her own eyes, there was no more breath left in her. She had heard the reports in her own country, and she said the reports had told her less than half. And it wasn't just money, it was reputation. Solomon asked God for one thing at the start of his reign, not wealth, not a long life, not victory over his enemies. He asked for wisdom, for the ability to tell right from wrong, to govern a people too numerous to count. And the story that gets told to prove he received it is one you already know. Two women, one living baby, both claiming to be the mother. Solomon calls for a sword and orders the child cut in two, half for each. The real mother screams, "Give her the baby, let it live." The false one says, "Divide it." And in that instant, Solomon knows. The one willing to lose the child rather than see it die is the mother. The whole nation heard that judgment, and the text says they were in awe of him, because they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. Kings and ambassadors came from every nation just to hear him speak. He composed thousands of proverbs and songs. He spoke about trees and animals and the natural world with a knowledge no one around him could match. He was, by every measure the ancient world had, the most successful human being alive. And then, at the peak of it all, he built the thing his whole reign had been pointing toward: the temple. For 7 years, tens of thousands of laborers worked on a single building on a hill in Jerusalem. Cedar hauled down from the mountains of Lebanon by international treaty. Stone cut so precisely at the quarry that the entire structure rose without the sound of a hammer or chisel on the building site. The inside was lined with cedar, and the cedar was overlaid with gold so that no stone was visible anywhere. 2 golden angels, each with a wingspan taller than a man, stood in the innermost room. This was not just a house of worship. It was a statement to every nation on earth. The God of Israel had a home now, and it was the most magnificent building in the known world. And when it was finished, the text describes a moment that is the absolute high point of the entire book. The priests carried the ark into the innermost room, and a cloud filled the temple. A presence so heavy, so overwhelming, that the priests could not even stand up to perform their duties. Solomon stood before the whole assembly of Israel and prayed, and the sense of the moment is unmistakable. This is the summit. This is as high, as blessed, as favored as this nation will ever be. Everything the ancestors were promised has arrived. The slaves who fled Egypt now run an empire. The wanderers now have a throne and a temple of gold. It should be a story with a happy ending. It has everything a happy ending needs. But here is where I need you to slow down, because hidden inside this golden picture, right here at the peak, are 3 small details. 3 quiet sentences the text drops almost without comment. And those 3 sentences are the fault line. Everything, the split of the kingdom, the fire on the mountain, the queen who fed prophets to the sword, the dogs in the street, all of it runs straight back to these 3 details that most readers slide right past. So let me show you the crack in the gold. Centuries before Solomon was born in the law of Moses, there was a specific warning written for a day when Israel would want a king. It was strangely precise. It named 3 things, and only 3 things, that a king of Israel must never do. He must not acquire many horses for himself. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be turned away, and he must not accumulate great amounts of silver and gold. 3 prohibitions: horses, wives, gold. Now go back and look at everything I just described. What was Solomon's kingdom famous for? Its cavalry. The text says he had thousands of chariot horses, stalls for them by the thousand, imported from Egypt and traded across the region. Strike 1. What was it famous for? Its unimaginable wealth. Silver like stones in the street, gold on everything. Strike 2. And the third one, the one the text saves for the moment the collapse begins, we'll come to in a few minutes. But you can already feel where this is going. The Golden Age was not built in spite of the warnings. It was built by breaking every single one of them. The very things the world admired most about Solomon, the horses, the treasure, and soon the wives, were the exact 3 things the law had said would destroy a king from the inside. His greatness and his ruin were the same thing, seen from 2 different distances. And that is the secret engine of this entire book. It's the thing that makes First Kings so much darker and so much smarter than the version most people grew up with. This is not a story about a good kingdom that got unlucky or that was crushed by stronger enemies from outside. Israel's deadliest enemy, from the first page to the last, is always Israel. The kingdom is never conquered before it is corrupted. The rot always comes first, from the throne, and the armies only arrive to collect on a debt that was already owed. Watch for that pattern, because it's going to repeat king after king all the way down. Prosperity, then pride, pride, then compromise, compromise, then a slow forgetting of the very thing that made them who they were. And every time it happens, a lone voice shows up, usually a prophet, usually with no army and no wealth and no protection, to say the one thing nobody at court wants to hear. There's a haunting little detail the text gives us about Solomon, right at the top, that tells you the whole tragedy in a single image. It says that Solomon loved the Lord. And then, in almost the same breath, it says, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places, the hilltop shrines of the surrounding nations where the local gods were worshipped. Even here, at the peak, even in the man who built the greatest temple in the world, the loyalty was already divided. 1 foot in the temple of gold, 1 foot on the pagan hill. That divided heart is going to become the story of the entire nation, a kingdom that never quite chooses, that wants the God who made it a superpower and also wants the gods of everyone around it, just in case. And that refusal to choose, stretched across 100 years and a dozen kings, is what finally tears the whole thing in half. But it doesn't tear yet. Right now, Solomon is still on the throne, the temple is still full of glory, and the kingdom is still the envy of the world. The wives are still arriving, hundreds of them from every foreign court, each one a treaty, each one a bride, each one bringing her own gods and her own priests and her own shrines into the heart of Jerusalem. And that third prohibition, the one about the wives, the one the law warned would turn a king's heart away, is about to come due. Because the wisest man who ever lived is about to make the single most foolish decision in the entire book. And it's going to open a wound in this kingdom that 400 years and the fire of empires will not be enough to close. That's where we're going next. The fall of the wisest man in the world, and the forgotten prophet who tore a royal robe into 12 pieces to show a workman what was about to happen to the kingdom of gold. Here is the question that hangs over the second act of Solomon's life, and it's a question that should bother you because it's really a question about all of us. How does the wisest man who ever lived become a fool? Not overnight. That's the first thing to understand. There is no single moment where Solomon wakes up and decides to throw it all away. The fall of a wise man is never a cliff. It's a slope. It's so gradual that the man walking down it never feels the ground tilting under his feet. Each individual step looks reasonable, sensible even, strategic. It's only when you stand at the bottom and look back up that you see how far you've come, and that every careful, clever step was walking you straight down into the dark. And Solomon's slope had a name. The text names it without flinching. It says, King Solomon loved many foreign women. Now, before you file that under the obvious moral lesson, understand what these marriages actually were, because they were not what you're picturing. In the ancient world, at this level of power, a royal marriage was not romance. It was foreign policy. When the king of Israel married the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt, that was not a love match. That was a treaty, sealed in flesh, that said Egypt and Israel will not go to war, because now we are family. Every princess who arrived in Jerusalem was a peace agreement with another kingdom, a closed border, a trade route secured, an enemy neutralized without drawing a sword. So look at it through Solomon's eyes for a second, because this is where the trap is so brilliant. Every one of these marriages made the kingdom safer. Every one of them extended the peace, widened the alliances, locked down another frontier. The more wives he took, the more secure his empire became. It was working. By the cold arithmetic of statecraft, it was genius. This is the man of wisdom, after all. solving the problem of national security the way a chess master solves a board. And by the end, the text gives us the number: 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, 1,000 political relationships, 1,000 treaties, a wall of alliances so thick that no army in the region would dare come near him. It looked like the ultimate strength. It was the exact mechanism of the collapse. Because remember the third warning. The ancient law, written centuries before, had named 3 things a king must never do, and we watched him break the first 2 already: the horses and the gold. Here is the third, word for word. He must not take many wives, or his heart will be turned away. Not his borders will be weakened. Not his enemies will grow strong. His heart will be turned away. The danger the law named was never military. It was interior. It was a danger to the one thing no treaty can protect: the loyalty of a man's own heart. And that is exactly what happened. And the text describes it with a quiet, devastating precision. It says that when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Read that carefully, because people misremember this part. It doesn't say Solomon stopped worshipping the God of Israel. He never renounced anything. That's not how the slope works. What he did was worse and far more familiar. He added, he kept the temple of gold, and he built other things next to it. His wives worshipped the gods of their homelands, and to keep 1,000 marriages happy, to be tolerant, to be accommodating, to be reasonable, the king began to build them shrines. He built a high place for Chemosh, the god of Moab. He built one for Molech, the god of the Ammonites. He built one for Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians. And here is the detail that should stop you cold, because it's a detail about geography, and the geography is the whole point. He built these shrines on the hill just east of Jerusalem, on the ridge directly across the valley from the temple, so that if you stood in the courtyard of the greatest house of worship in the ancient world, the house Solomon himself had spent 7 years and a fortune building for the God who made him great, and you lifted your eyes, you would see on the opposite hill the smoking altars of the gods of the nations, facing it, staring back. And one of those gods was Molech. In that era, the worship of Molech is tied in the ancient sources to the most unspeakable practice of the whole region, the sacrifice of children in fire. We will come back to that horror later in this story because it doesn't stay on the hill, it comes down into the kingdom and takes root. But sit with the image for now. The wisest man in the world built the true temple, and then, to please his marriages, built its rivals within sight of it. He put the shrine of a child-devouring god on the skyline of the holy city. This is what the text means when it says, his heart was divided. It was never a clean break. It was a man trying to hold 2 things at once that cannot both be held: loyalty to the God who made his nation, and loyalty to the gods of everyone he wanted to keep happy. And a divided heart, stretched out over a whole reign, becomes a divided kingdom. What starts inside one man ends up splitting a nation in 2. Watch that, because it's the pattern of the entire book. The crack always starts on the inside, and now the tone of the story changes, because God responds. And the text says the Lord was angry with Solomon, and it adds a line that makes the anger land harder. It says because his heart had turned away from the Lord, who had appeared to him twice. Twice. God had not left this man in the dark. Solomon had received what almost no one in the entire Bible receives: 2 direct personal encounters with God. He had been warned specifically about this exact failure, and he did it anyway. This is not the fall of a man who didn't know better. This is the fall of a man who knew better than anyone alive and chose the slope regardless. And the sentence God pronounces is the seed of everything that follows in this book. He says, because you have done this, I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. Tear. The same violent word that's about to become a physical act in a field. The kingdom will be ripped like cloth. But then God attaches 2 mercies to the sentence, and both of them matter enormously for the next 100 years of the story. First, he says, I will not do it in your days. For the sake of David your father, the tearing will happen in the days of your son. And second, I will not tear away the whole kingdom. For the sake of David and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city I have chosen, I will leave one tribe to your son. Stop and notice what just happened, because this is the engine of the whole book clicking into place. God has just made a prophecy that will not come true for years, and that will land not on the guilty man, but on his child. The judgment is delayed and displaced. Solomon will die in his palace, in his bed, an old and honored king, and the catastrophe he earned will detonate on the head of the son who inherits his throne. If you've ever wondered why the Bible keeps insisting that the consequences of a choice can outrun the person who made it, this is one of the places it's teaching you to watch for it. The debt is real. It's just not always collected from the one who ran it up. And you're going to see this delayed fuse pattern again and again. A prophet speaks, nothing happens. Years pass, kings come and go. And then, decades later, the word arrives, precise and unstoppable, and every detail lands exactly as it was spoken. Keep count as we go, because by the end of this story, the batting average of the prophetic word in this book is going to be perfect. Every single one comes true. So how does God begin to collect? Quietly, almost invisibly at first. The text says, "The Lord raised up adversaries against Solomon." And it's such a small phrase that you can miss what it's telling you. The golden peace, the thing 1,000 marriages were built to protect, was already cracking at the edges while Solomon still sat on the throne in all his glory. On the surface, the empire of silver and gold. Underneath, the foundations shifting. There was Hadad, a prince of Edom, who as a boy had escaped one of David's old wars and grown up in exile in Egypt, nursing a grievance across a lifetime, and who now came home to trouble the southern border. There was Rezon, a warlord who seized Damascus in the north and became, in the text's words, an enemy of Israel all the days of Solomon. The frontiers the marriages were supposed to seal were leaking. The strong man's house was quietly filling with thorns. But the adversary who matters, the one the whole story now turns on, was not a foreign prince at all. He was one of Solomon's own men. His name was Jeroboam, son of Nebat, from the tribe of Ephraim, in the resentful, heavily taxed north. And he was good. The text goes out of its way to tell you he was a capable, industrious young man, so capable that Solomon noticed him and promoted him, and put him in charge of the entire labor force of the house of Joseph. Which means Jeroboam's job, every single day, was to manage the forced labor and the crushing taxation that built Solomon's glory on the backs of the northern tribes. He stood at the exact pressure point of the kingdom. He was the man who saw up close what all that gold actually cost and who paid for it. An ambitious, gifted northerner, standing at the fault line, watching the resentment build. And it was on an ordinary day, on an open road outside Jerusalem, that the prophecy of God and the ambition of Jeroboam collided. He was walking out of the city alone when a prophet met him, Ahijah from the old sacred town of Shiloh. And Ahijah was wearing a new cloak, a fine, whole, valuable garment. And in front of Jeroboam, without a word of warning, the prophet took hold of that brand new cloak and tore it apart with his hands. Not once. He ripped it into 12 pieces. Imagine watching that. A respected holy man destroying something new and expensive right in front of you, deliberately, methodically, into 12 ragged strips. And then he holds them out and says, "Take 10 pieces for yourself. Because this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give 10 tribes to you. 12 pieces, 12 tribes, 10 in the hand of a labor foreman standing in a field. The map of the coming civil war acted out in torn fabric on the side of a road." And Ahijah adds the same 2 mercies God had spoken. One tribe will remain for the house of David, for the sake of David and the city of Jerusalem, and it will not happen while Solomon lives. But then he attaches something to Jeroboam himself, a condition, and I want you to hold on to it. because it's going to matter more than almost anything else in this story. He tells Jeroboam, "If you listen to me and do what is right in my eyes, keeping my commandments as David did, then I will be with you, and I will build you a dynasty as enduring as I built for David." There it is, the offer. Jeroboam is being handed a kingdom and, along with it, the exact same deal David got. Be faithful, and your house will last for generations. It is an astonishing gift. 10 tribes and a promise. All he has to do is not repeat the mistake he just watched destroy the wisest man in the world. Remember that offer, because when we get to the third part of this story, you are going to watch Jeroboam receive his kingdom, stand at the top of it, and then, out of fear, make a decision so catastrophic that his name becomes the Bible's permanent shorthand for the king who ruined everything. The man handed the deal of David is going to become the anti-David. But that's ahead of us. Back in Jerusalem, Solomon found out. And here is the final, saddest measure of how far the wise man had fallen. The Solomon of the Golden Age, the one who asked God for the wisdom to discern good from evil, now responds to a divine prophecy the way a paranoid tyrant responds to a rival. He tries to have Jeroboam killed. The man who once held a sword over a baby to reveal the truth now reaches for a sword to silence it. Jeroboam runs. He escapes to Egypt to the protection of a king named Shishak, and there he waits for the old king to die. Hold that name Shishak in the back of your mind. He is going to walk out of Egypt later in this story and into the solid rock of the archaeological record. And when he does, he's going to be one of the first hard proofs that the people in this book were real. And then, quietly, the Golden Age ends. The text says Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel 40 years, and then he rested with his ancestors and was buried in the city of David. That's it. No fire, no war, no dramatic downfall for Solomon himself. He dies old, rich, and honored, exactly as the mercy promised. The bill for his choices is still sitting there, unpaid. It will be handed in full to the next man who sits on the throne. There is an old tradition that in his final years, this same Solomon wrote that everything under the sun is meaningless, a chasing after wind, that the man who had more wealth, more wisdom, more pleasure, and more power than anyone alive looked at the whole shining pile of it and called it emptiness. Whether or not those are literally his words, they hang over the end of his story like a shadow. The richest man in the world, at the summit of everything, concluding that he had built his house on sand. And now the sand is about to shift, because everything, the 10 torn pieces, the delayed sentence, the exile waiting in Egypt, the resentful north, the divided heart of a nation, all of it now depends on one young man, one meeting, and one single afternoon in a town called Shechem. The Golden Kingdom is a dry field in a drought. Ahijah has already struck the match. All that's left is for the new king to open his mouth. And he is about to say 7 words that will burn it all down. Some kingdoms are lost on a battlefield. This one was lost in a conversation. And the whole thing took less than an afternoon. When Solomon died, the crown passed to his son, Rehoboam. And the first thing you need to understand about Rehoboam is where he went to be made king. He didn't stay in Jerusalem, the golden capital, the city of the temple, the seat of his father's power. He traveled north to a town called Shechem, deep in the territory of the 10 tribes. And that detail tells you everything about the real state of the kingdom his father left behind. The south was already his. It was the north he had to go and win. The north he had to be crowned in front of, because the north was not sure it wanted him at all. And waiting for him at Shechem was a familiar face, Jeroboam, the gifted labor foreman who had fled to Egypt with a death sentence over his head, who had waited out the old king's life in exile, and who now, the moment Solomon was in the ground, came home. The 10 torn pieces of Ahijah's cloak had walked back across the border, and the northern tribes had made him their spokesman. So the confrontation was set. On one side, the young heir, fresh to the throne, standing on his father's reputation. On the other, the entire population of the north, led by the one man God had already promised the kingdom to. And what the north asked for, at first, was not rebellion. It was relief. They said to Rehoboam, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, the forced labor, the taxation, the conscription that built the palaces and the temple and the chariot cities on the backs of our people. Lighten it, make our burden a little easier, and we will serve you. We will be your subjects. Just ease the weight." It was a reasonable request, and it was also a test, and everyone in that room knew it. This was the hinge of the whole kingdom. Handle it well, and Rehoboam keeps the empire his grandfather David built, and his father Solomon expanded. Handle it badly, and it comes apart in his hands. Rehoboam asked for 3 days to decide, and in those 3 days, he did something that looks wise on the surface. He asked for advice, twice, from 2 very different rooms. First, he went to the elders, the old men who had stood in Solomon's court, who had actually governed, who knew what it took to hold a kingdom together, and their counsel was clean and shrewd and completely correct. They told him, "If today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever. Give a little now," they said, "and you gain everything later. Bend once, and they will never break from you. It is the oldest wisdom of leadership there is. Power that serves is power that lasts." And Rehoboam didn't like it. So he left that room and went to another one. He went to the young men he had grown up with, the sons of privilege who had never governed anything, who had never carried a burden or felt a yoke, who had only ever known the palace from the inside. And he asked them the same question, and they gave him the answer he had wanted all along. They told him to crush it, to answer strength with strength. They fed him a line so arrogant it has echoed for 3,000 years, and they told him to say it to the faces of the 10 tribes. And on the 3rd day, Jeroboam and all the people came back for his answer. And Rehoboam looked at them, and he chose the young men's words over the old men's wisdom. He said, "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it heavier. My father disciplined you with whips. I will discipline you with scorpions. Strip away the bluster." And his answer was 7 words long. "Whatever my father did, I'll do worse." That was it. That was the conversation that ended the kingdom. No army had moved. No border had been crossed. A young king, out of pride, had been offered the wisdom that would have saved everything, and had traded it for a boast. And the North did not argue. They did not petition again. They answered him with a chant that had been waiting in their throats for a generation. "What share do we have in David? What inheritance in the son of Jesse? To your tents, O Israel. Look now to your own house, David." And they turned around and walked away. 10 tribes, just like that. The united kingdom of Israel, the empire that stretched from the Euphrates to the border of Egypt, the golden throne that kings crossed continents to see, came apart in the time it takes to have an argument. Rehoboam, unbelievably, still didn't grasp what had happened, because he did the one thing guaranteed to make it final. He sent out the man in charge of the forced labor, the official who embodied the exact grievance the whole North had just walked out over, to go and assert royal authority. And the people of Israel stoned that man to death in the road. And at that, Rehoboam finally understood. He scrambled into his chariot and fled for his life back to Jerusalem. He wanted to fight. He gathered 180,000 men from Judah to march north and take the kingdom back by force. But a prophet named Shemaiah stopped him with a word from God. "Do not go up. Do not fight against your brothers. Every man go home, because this thing is from me." And there it is again. Watch the pattern. This thing is from me. The split that looked like a political accident, the product of one king's pride and one afternoon's stupidity, was also the exact fulfillment of what Ahijah had torn into 12 pieces years earlier, and of what God had told Solomon on the day his heart turned. The prophecy had said the kingdom would be torn in the days of the sun, and here was the sun, watching it tear right on schedule. The human choices were completely real. Rehoboam's pride was really his, and underneath the human choices, the older word was coming true to the letter. That double layer, free choice on the surface, and the prophetic word underneath, is the machine that runs this entire book. So now there are 2 kingdoms where there was one. In the south, Judah. Two tribes, really, clustered around Jerusalem, the Temple, and the House of David. In the north, Israel. The 10 tribes, the larger territory, the better farmland, and a brand new king with no dynasty behind him and no temple in his borders. Jeroboam had finally received exactly what the prophet promised: 10 tribes, a kingdom, and the same open-ended offer God had given David. Be faithful, and I will build you a house that lasts. He held, in his hands, the chance to start a rival dynasty blessed by God. All he had to do was stay loyal, and this is the moment the whole book has been building toward. Because Jeroboam looked at his new kingdom, and instead of trusting the God who gave it to him, he did the math. And fear did the rest. Here was his problem. The temple, the one place God had chosen, the center of worship for the whole nation, was in Jerusalem, which was now the capital of the enemy kingdom. 3 times a year, his people were supposed to travel south into Rehoboam's territory to worship. And Jeroboam thought, if my people keep going down to Jerusalem, to that temple, their hearts will turn back to the house of David. They'll kill me and go back to Rehoboam. My kingdom will drain away, one pilgrimage at a time. It was a shrewd political fear. And his solution to it became the single most consequential sin in the northern kingdom's entire history. He made 2 golden calves. He set one up in Bethel, at the southern end of his kingdom, and one in Dan, at the far north. And he said to the people the words that would define his name forever: "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." If that phrasing gives you a chill, it should, because it is a deliberate echo. It is almost word for word what was said centuries earlier at the foot of Mount Sinai, when the people melted their jewelry into a golden calf while Moses was still up on the mountain. Jeroboam reached back and pulled out the oldest, most catastrophic idolatry in the nation's memory, and he made it state policy. He built shrines. He appointed his own priests, men who weren't even from the priestly tribe, anyone who wanted the job. He invented his own festival, in his own month, a counterfeit of the real one, and he climbed the altar himself to lead it. He took the religion of the living God, and he built a convenient copy, one that didn't require his people to leave his kingdom, one he controlled from top to bottom. And from this point on, for the rest of the book, almost every northern king who comes after him gets measured against this exact act. The text will say it again and again, like a bell tolling. He walked in the way of Jeroboam, and in the sin he caused Israel to commit. It becomes the permanent benchmark for national ruin, the sin of Jeroboam. And it's in the middle of this, while Jeroboam is standing on his fake altar in Bethel, that one of the strangest and most unsettling stories in the entire Bible unfolds. Most people have never heard it, and once you have, it stays with you. A man of God came out of Judah, sent by the word of the Lord, and he arrived at Bethel while Jeroboam was standing at the altar to burn incense. And he cried out against the altar itself. He said, "A child will be born to the house of David, a son named Josiah, and on you, this very altar, he will burn the bones of these false priests." Hold on to that name, Josiah, because that prophecy was just planted right here, and it will not be fulfilled for roughly 300 years. 3 centuries. A king who has not been born will not be born for 10 generations is named out loud, standing here in Bethel, and told exactly what he will do to this altar. This is the deepest, longest fuse in the whole book, and history hundreds of years later lights it. Jeroboam, enraged, stretched out his hand from the altar and shouted, "Seize him!" And in that instant, his outstretched hand withered, it froze, shriveled, and he could not pull it back. And the altar behind him split apart, and its ashes poured out onto the ground, exactly as the sign had promised. The king, humiliated, his arm hanging dead at his side, begged the man of God to pray for him. The prophet prayed, and the hand was restored. And Jeroboam, suddenly gracious, invited him back to the palace for a meal and a reward. And the man of God refused, because God had given him strict, specific instructions: eat no bread, drink no water, and do not return by the road you came. Deliver the word and go straight home, changed by nothing and no one along the way. So he turned to leave by a different road. And this is where the story turns dark and quiet and strange. There was an old prophet living in Bethel. His sons told him what had happened at the altar. And this old prophet saddled his donkey, rode after the man of God, and found him resting under a tree. And he said, "Come home with me and eat." The man of God repeated his orders. "I cannot. God told me not to eat or drink here, and to go home another way." And then the old prophet said the words that killed him. He said, "I am a prophet too. And an angel spoke to me by the word of the Lord and said, 'Bring him back to your house so he can eat and drink.'" It was a lie. The text tells you plainly he was lying to him, but the man of God believed it. He turned around, went back, sat at the old man's table, and ate the bread and drank the water God had forbidden. And while they were sitting at that very table, the word of the Lord actually did come to the old prophet, the real word this time, and he cried out against his own guest. "Because you defied the word of the Lord and came back and ate bread in the place you were told not to, your body will not be buried in the tomb of your fathers." The man of God finished the meal, got on a donkey, and rode away. And on the road a lion met him and killed him. But here is the detail that turns the whole thing into something you can't shake. The lion did not eat the body. It did not touch the donkey. It simply stood there, beside the corpse, on the road, next to the donkey, all three of them frozen in place, so that travelers passing by came and reported this impossible scene in the town. A dead man, a living lion, and a standing donkey, keeping watch together over the consequence of one act of disobedience. The old prophet heard, and he knew. He went and collected the body, and he buried it in his own tomb, and he mourned over him, saying, "Alas, my brother." And he told his sons, "When I die, bury me beside him, and lay my bones next to his bones," because he knew the word the man had spoken against the altar was true, and he wanted, in death, to be on the right side of it. Now sit with what that story is doing, because it is not there by accident. A true prophet who did everything right, who faced down a king who watched a royal hand wither at his word, is destroyed, not by the king, not by the false religion, by a single moment of listening to the wrong voice, by believing a lie that told him it was safe to bend the rule just once. The most dangerous voice in the story was not the tyrant on the altar. It was the fellow prophet who said, "Relax, the rule doesn't apply this time. I heard it from an angel." Even the messenger of God is not exempt from the word of God. Nobody in this book is too holy, too chosen, or too close to the center to fall when they compromise. Remember that, because it is going to come for kings, for queens, and for the greatest prophet in the whole story before we are done. And Jeroboam? He watched all of it, the withered hand, the split altar, the impossible warning, and the text delivers its verdict in one flat, damning sentence. Even after this, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way. He saw the power of the true God with his own eyes, felt it freeze his own arm, and went right back to his golden calves. He had been handed the deal of David, and he chose the calf instead. His house was doomed from that decision forward. So the north begins its life already rotten at the root, a kingdom founded on a golden calf, led by a king who saw the truth and turned away from it on purpose. And from this poisoned soil, everything that comes next is going to grow. Because now the story leaves the split behind and starts down the long, bloody staircase of the northern kings. One dynasty murdering the next, king after king, each one clinging to Jeroboam's calves, each one a little worse than the last. And near the bottom of that staircase is a king the Bible almost refuses to talk about. It gives him a handful of verses and moves on as if he barely mattered. But the empires that surrounded Israel remembered him for 100 years. They carved his name into stone. And what archaeologists dug out of the ground tells a very different story from the one the Bible seems to want to tell. His name was Omri, and he is where the record of the Bible and the record of the shovel start to touch. For the next 50 years, the northern kingdom of Israel becomes one of the bloodiest political stories in the ancient world. And the pattern is so relentless that once you see it, you can predict it. A king does evil. A prophet pronounces doom on his house. And then a soldier with ambition and a sword walks in and makes the prophecy come true, usually by murdering every male in the royal family. Then that soldier becomes king, does the same evil, and the clock starts again on his own destruction. It is a machine, and it runs on the sin of Jeroboam, and it runs fast. 5 kings in the next 50 years, most of them murdered, one of them lasting a single week. But keep your eye on the bottom of this staircase of blood, because that is where you will find the one king the Bible almost refuses to name. And the reason it looks away from him is stranger than anything the murderers in this section are about to do. Start with Jeroboam's own dynasty, the one God had offered to make as permanent as David's. It lasted exactly 1 generation past him. His son Nadab took the throne and reigned 2 years, and he did evil, and he clung to the golden calves like his father. And while Nadab was out with the army besieging a Philistine town, a man named Baasha conspired against him, killed him, and seized the crown. And then Baasha did what the prophet Ahijah had warned would happen. He struck down the entire house of Jeroboam, every last male. He did not leave a single one alive until the whole family was wiped off the earth. And the text pauses to tell you why, in case you missed it. This happened because of the sins Jeroboam had committed, and because he had made Israel commit them. The golden calf, the counterfeit religion, the whole clever political solution to his fear, it all came due right here in the extermination of his bloodline. The prophecy Ahijah spoke years before landed exactly. The word does not miss. But watch what Baasha does next. Having just been the instrument of God's judgment on one idolatrous house, Baasha climbs the same throne and worships the same calves. He learns nothing. So a prophet named Jehu, son of Hanani, comes to him with a sentence that should sound familiar, because it is almost word for word the one spoken over Jeroboam. Your house will become like the house of Jeroboam. The dogs will eat those who die in the city, the birds will eat those who die in the field. And it happens. Baasha reigns 24 years and dies. His son Elah takes the throne, and Elah is a drunk. One evening, while he is getting drunk in the house of a servant, one of his own officers, a man named Zimri, who commanded half the royal chariots, walks in and kills him. And Zimri, following the machine precisely, wipes out the entire house of Baasha, every male, every relative, every friend, exactly as Jehu the prophet had said. So now Zimri sits on the throne, and here is where the northern kingdom hits the lowest, most chaotic point in its history so far, because Zimri's reign lasts 7 days. 7 days. The army was in the field, camped out besieging a town, when the news reached them that Zimri had murdered the king and taken the crown, and the soldiers, right there in the camp, refused to accept it. They took their own commander, a general named Omri, and they declared him king on the spot, in the middle of the war camp. And Omri broke off the siege, turned the entire army around, and marched on the capital city of Tirzah to take the throne by force. And Zimri, 7 days a king, watched an army he could not possibly stop close in around his city. He knew there was no escape, so he walked into the innermost stronghold of the royal palace, and he set it on fire, and he burned it down on top of himself. He died in the flames of his own throne room, a king for 1 week who ended his reign by turning the palace into his own funeral pyre. That is the state of the northern kingdom now, kings murdering kings, dynasties lasting a single generation before being butchered to the last man. A throne so cursed that one man held it for a week and chose to burn alive rather than be captured. This is what Jeroboam's golden calf grew into. This is the harvest of a kingdom founded on a lie. And out of that chaos, out of the smoke of that burning palace, steps the man who finally stops the bleeding, Omri. Now here is where this story does something fascinating, and where I need you to pay very close attention, because we are about to watch the Bible and the archaeological record openly disagree about how important a man was. If you read the book of 1 Kings, Omri is almost nothing. He gets a handful of verses. The text tells you he won a short civil war against a rival named Tibni, that he eventually became sole king, that he reigned 12 years, and that he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and in fact behaved worse than everyone before him. And then it moves on, fast, like a writer eager to get to something more interesting. By the Bible's word count, Omri barely registers. He is a footnote between the chaos before him and his famous son after him. But the Bible does record one thing Omri did, one decision. It says he bought a hill from a man named Shemer for 2 talents of silver, and on that hill he built a city, and he named it Samaria. That single sentence is one of the smartest political moves in the entire history of the Northern Kingdom. Because think about what a new capital, built from scratch, on land the king personally purchased, actually is. It belongs to no tribe. It carries no old loyalties, no rival claims, no ancient grievances. It is the king's own city, the way Jerusalem had been David's own city, chosen precisely because it stood outside the tribal map. And the hill of Samaria was a natural fortress, high, defensible, commanding the trade routes and the surrounding valleys. Omri didn't just pick a spot. He founded a dynasty's power base that would stand as the capital of the north for the next century and a half. And when archaeologists went to that hill and dug, they found him. They found the foundations of a royal city built with masonry so fine, so precisely cut and fitted, that it stands among the best stonework anywhere in the region in that era. This was not the crude fort of a footnote king. This was the capital of a serious, wealthy, organized state. The ground itself testifies that Omri built something major, and it gets bigger, because outside the Bible, in the records of the other nations, Omri is not a footnote at all. He is a giant. There is a black stone monument discovered in the 1860s that we call the Mesha Stele, or the Moabite stone. It was carved on the orders of King Mesha of Moab, one of Israel's neighbors, right in this period. And on it, Mesha brags about his own achievements, and in doing so he tells us how his kingdom saw Israel. He writes that Omri, king of Israel, oppressed Moab for many days. He refers to the house of Omri as the power that had dominated his people. This is not the Bible talking about Omri. This is a foreign enemy king, carving into stone his memory of being crushed under Omri's boot. To Moab, Omri was the superpower next door. And that same monument, this hostile foreign inscription, casually mentions other things too. It names the God of Israel, spelled out, the sacred name. It names the god of Moab, Chemosh, the same Chemosh Solomon had built a shrine for on the hill outside Jerusalem. The stone confirms, from the outside, from an enemy's hand, the exact world the Bible is describing. The kingdoms, the gods, the wars, the names, all of it cut into rock by someone who hated Israel and had no reason to flatter it. But the most striking proof of Omri's true stature comes from the greatest empire of the age, Assyria. For more than 100 years after Omri, long after his dynasty had been butchered and replaced, the Assyrian kings kept referring to the entire northern kingdom of Israel by one name. They called it the House of Omri. In their inscriptions, Israel is Omri land. Even later kings of Israel, men who were not related to Omri at all, who came from completely different families, are called in Assyrian records the son of Omri, simply because they ruled the land Omri had made famous. On one famous Assyrian monument, a king of Israel named Jehu, a man who actually destroyed what remained of Omri's dynasty, is still labeled Jehu, son of Omri. The name had become the label for the whole nation. Think about what that means. To the greatest empire on earth, for a century, the northern kingdom of Israel was, quite simply, the country Omri built. His name outlived his bloodline and became the name of the land itself in the archives of the ancient world. So here is the collision, and it is one of the most revealing things in the whole book. By every measure, the ancient world used to rank a king, military power, international reputation, monumental building, the founding of a lasting capital, Omri was one of the most successful rulers Israel ever produced. History remembered him for 100 years. Enemies carved his name in stone. Empires named a nation after him. And the Bible gives him 8 verses and a shrug. Why? Because the Bible is not keeping the same scoreboard. The monuments of the ancient world measured a king by his power. The book of 1 Kings measures a king by one thing, and one thing only. Was his heart loyal to the God who made the nation, or was it divided? On that scoreboard, the only one the text actually cares about, Omri scores at the very bottom. Worse than everyone before him, it says. All his fortresses and his fine masonry and his terrified neighbors counted for nothing because the strength was hollow. It was the same hollowness we've seen from the start, a kingdom that looks unstoppable from the outside and is rotting from the inside. Two scoreboards. One measures the size of your monuments, the other measures the state of your heart. And a man can top the first while sitting dead last on the second and never even notice the difference, because the world keeps applauding the only score it can see. That is the quiet, devastating point the text is making by refusing to be impressed with the man everyone else was impressed with. It is telling you plainly that you are keeping score of the wrong thing. And it turns out that Omri's most important act, in the eyes of the book, was not a war or a fortress or a capital city. It was a wedding. Somewhere in his reign, to secure an alliance with the wealthy trading kingdom of Phoenicia to the north, Omri arranged a marriage for his son and heir. He married the crown prince of Israel to a foreign princess, the daughter of the king of Sidon, a woman raised in the temples of Baal, a devotee of her god, as fierce and total as anyone in this entire story. Her name was Jezebel. And that marriage, that single strategic alliance, that clever piece of Phoenician diplomacy, is about to bring the northern kingdom to the darkest place it has ever been. Because the son was named Ahab, and together Ahab and Jezebel are going to do something no king of Israel had dared to do before. They are not going to add Baal to the worship of the true God, the way Solomon added his shrines. They are going to try to replace him, to make Baal the official god of the state and to hunt down and kill anyone who stands in the way. The slow slide is over. The open war for the soul of the nation is about to begin. And to fight it, God is going to raise up the most dramatic, most fearless, most haunted figure in the entire Old Testament. A man who appears out of nowhere with no introduction, no lineage and no fear, and shuts the sky over the whole kingdom with a single sentence. His name was Elijah, and he is coming next. I told you Elijah was coming. He is. But to understand why his first act lands on the kingdom like a thunderclap, you have to see the throne room he walked into. Because Elijah does not appear in a vacuum. He appears in the middle of the most aggressive religious takeover in the entire history of Israel. And the two people running it are about to become the villains that every prophet, for centuries afterward, measures all other evil against. Ahab and Jezebel. The text introduces Ahab with a verdict so heavy, it almost seems like an exaggeration. It says that Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than all who were before him. All of them. Every murderous, calf-worshipping king we just walked through, the whole bloody staircase. And Ahab is worse than the lot combined. And then the text tells you why. And the phrasing is surgical. It says, as if it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, he went and married Jezebel, daughter of the king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him. Read that carefully, because there is a crucial distinction hiding in it. The text is saying that all the old idolatry, the golden calves that had defined the northern kingdom for 50 years, that was now the small stuff, the warm-up. What Ahab brought was a different order of thing entirely. Here is the difference, and it is the key to everything that follows. Solomon, back at the beginning, added foreign gods. He built shrines on the hill for his wives' gods while keeping the temple of the true God standing. It was compromise, a divided heart, bad enough. But Ahab and Jezebel were not interested in adding Baal to the mix. They wanted to replace. They set out to make Baal the official god of the state of Israel, and to erase the worship of the God who had made the nation entirely. This was not a divided heart anymore. This was a hostile takeover. Ahab built a temple for Baal right in the capital city of Samaria. He built an altar for Baal inside it. He set up a sacred pole for the goddess Asherah. State money, state land, state power all turned toward a foreign god. For the first time, the worship of Baal was not a private compromise on a hilltop. It was national policy, headquartered in the capital. And to understand why this particular god, and why the war that's coming takes the exact shape it does, you have to know what Baal actually was. Baal was the great god of the Phoenicians and the Canaanites, and his portfolio was very specific. He was the storm god, the lord of the rain, the thunder, the clouds. And because in an agricultural world rain is life, Baal was also the god of fertility, of the harvest, of whether the crops grew and the flocks multiplied and the people ate or starved. In that part of the world, Baal was believed to be the one who decided whether the sky opened and the land lived, or the sky closed and everything died. Hold that thought, because it is not a detail. It is the whole battlefield. The coming confrontation between the God of Israel and the God of Jezebel is going to be fought on exactly this ground, over the rain, over who actually controls the sky. Remember that Baal is the rain god, because the very first thing that happens is that the rain stops. But first, meet the woman at the center of it, because Ahab may have worn the crown, but the engine of this whole campaign was Jezebel. She was not a passive foreign bride, arriving with her customs and quietly keeping her own religion in a corner of the palace. She was a true believer, a zealot with the full force of the throne behind her. Her father was Ithbaal, king of the Sidonians, and there is an old tradition that he had been a priest of the goddess Astarte before he seized his own throne. So Jezebel came from a bloodline where royalty and the priesthood of these gods were fused together. She did not see Baal as one option among many. She saw the God of Israel as the intruder, the obstacle, the thing to be cleared away, and she had the resources to do it. The text tells us she maintained on the royal payroll 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, 850 state-sponsored clergy of a foreign religion eating at the Queen's own table, funded by the treasury of Israel. This was not tolerance, this was establishment. An entire professional class of Baal's servants installed at the heart of the kingdom, paid for by the nation they were converting. And then Jezebel did the thing that turns a religious program into a reign of terror. She started killing. The text says plainly that Jezebel was cutting off the prophets of the Lord, hunting them, executing them, a systematic effort to find and kill every man who still spoke for the God of Israel, until there were none left, until the memory itself was gone. This is the part that puts Ahab and Jezebel in their own category. Every wicked king before them had neglected the true worship, or corrupted it, or replaced it with a convenient counterfeit. Jezebel set out to physically exterminate it, to murder her way to a nation with only one God and make sure that God was hers. Now, if you've been with me since the beginning of this story, you should be feeling a very specific echo right now, because we have seen this exact combination before, in a different valley, in a different age. Enormous wealth fused with systematic cruelty aimed at the powerless. A society so committed to its own comfort and its own gods that it turned the machinery of the state against the vulnerable and called it order. That was the sickness of the cities on the plain, and here it is again, wearing a crown, sitting in a palace of ivory in Samaria. And I do mean a palace of ivory, literally, because this is one of the places where the shovel confirms the text in a way that gives you chills. The Bible mentions, almost in passing, that Ahab built an ivory house, a palace decorated with ivory. And for a long time that could have been read as poetic exaggeration, a way of saying he was rich. But then archaeologists excavated the royal Acropolis at Samaria, Omri and Ahab's capital, and they pulled out of the ground hundreds of pieces of intricately carved ivory, delicate inlays and plaques, once fitted into fine furniture and wall panels, carved with Phoenician and Egyptian designs, images of lions and sphinxes and lotus flowers and gods, luxury on a scale that matched the text word for word. Ahab really did sit in a house adorned with ivory. The opulence the Bible describes was pulled out of the dirt of Samaria in physical fragments you can hold in your hand. And a century later, a prophet named Amos would look back on this ruling class, the heirs of exactly this wealth, and thunder against them. He condemned the ones who lie on beds of ivory and lounge on their couches, who feast on the finest lambs, who invent music and drink wine by the bowlful, and who are not grieved in the least over the ruin of their nation. Beds of ivory. The same ivory the archaeologists found, the luxury and the cruelty, were two faces of the same regime. They lounged in carved ivory while they hunted the prophets of God through the caves. But even here, in the darkest court in the story, the light was not completely out. Because inside Ahab's own palace, in the highest levels of his administration, there was a secret. The man who ran Ahab's entire household, his palace administrator, the chief of staff of the wicked king himself, was a man named Obadiah. And Obadiah, the text tells us, feared the Lord greatly. He had served in that court, kept his position, kept his head, and kept in absolute secret a loyalty to the God the queen was trying to erase. And when Jezebel's purge was at its worst, when she was slaughtering the prophets of the Lord wherever she found them, Obadiah did something extraordinary. He took 100 of those prophets and he hid them, 50 in one cave, 50 in another, and he smuggled them bread and water to keep them alive, at the constant risk of his own life, right under the nose of the queen who would have killed him for it. Sit with that image for a second because it matters. The kingdom looks totally lost. Baal is the state religion. The queen is exterminating the faithful. The king is the most evil in the nation's history. From the outside, the God of Israel appears to be finished, defeated, erased from his own land. And yet, hidden in caves, fed in secret by a righteous man planted at the very center of the enemy's power, 100 prophets are still alive. The light is buried, but it is not out. Keep that in your mind, because Elijah is about to feel utterly alone, and he is going to be wrong about that. There is always a remnant. There are always the hidden 100 in the caves. But from the throne room, none of that is visible. From the throne room, it looks like total victory. Ahab and Jezebel have the crown, the army, the treasury, the temple of Baal, 850 prophets, and a purge well underway. The land has been captured. The takeover is nearly complete. There is no opposition left standing anywhere in the open. The war for the soul of Israel looks like it is already over, and Baal has won. And that is the exact moment God chooses to strike. Not with an army, not with a rival king, with one man. He is not introduced. He has no genealogy, no backstory, no royal blood, no priestly office. The text simply drops him into the story out of nowhere, as abruptly as a lightning strike. Elijah the Tishbite, from the settlers of Gilead. A rough, wild figure from the eastern frontier, from the edge of the kingdom, from nowhere anyone important would look. And he walks, somehow, into the presence of the most powerful and dangerous king in Israel's history, into the court of the man whose wife is executing prophets on sight, and he delivers one sentence. And notice what the sentence is about. He says, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand, there will be no dew or rain in these years, except by my word." No rain. Do you see the audacity of it? He walks into the temple state of the storm god, into the capital of the cult of Baal, the lord of the rain and the harvest, and he announces that the sky is going to close. That the one thing Baal exists to provide, the rain, is now shut off. And it will not return, not by Baal, not by his 850 prophets, not by the queen, not by anyone, until this one ragged man from the frontier says so. It is a direct, public, devastating challenge aimed at the exact heart of Jezebel's God. You claim your Baal controls the sky. Watch the sky. And then, having lit the fuse on the entire confrontation, Elijah is gone. He vanishes. God sends him into hiding, into the wilderness, and the drought settles over the whole land like a slow, tightening hand. And for the next 3.5 years, the kingdom of Ahab and Jezebel begins to die of thirst. The crops fail, the grass withers, the livestock starve, the rivers shrink to cracked mud. The God of rain has nothing to say, and a manhunt begins. because Ahab wants, more than anything in the world, to find the man who shut the sky and make him open it. That hunt, those years in hiding, the ravens, the widow, and the dead boy brought back to life, are where we go next. Because before Elijah faces down 850 prophets on a mountain, God is going to spend 3 years teaching him in secret exactly whose word actually controls the bread, the oil, and the breath in a dead child's lungs. Before a man can face down 850 enemies on a mountain in front of an entire nation, God takes him into the wilderness and spends 3 years teaching him one lesson. And the lesson is this: it is not the God of rain who feeds you. It is not the God of harvest who fills the jar. Every scrap of bread, every drop of oil, every breath in your lungs comes from one source, and it is not Baal. Elijah is about to learn that in the most personal way possible, and only after he has learned it is he ready for Carmel. So follow him out of the palace and into hiding. After Elijah shut the sky, God did not send him to lead a rebellion or rally an army. God told him to disappear. Go east, hide by a brook called Cherith, out in the wilderness beyond the Jordan. And there, God said, I have commanded the ravens to feed you. The ravens. Stop on that, because it is not a throwaway detail. In the law of Israel, the raven was an unclean bird, a scavenger, a creature that feeds on death and carrion, the last animal you would expect to bring a holy man his supper. And yet, morning and evening, the ravens came to Elijah carrying bread and meat, and he drank from the brook, and he lived. God was already making a quiet point. I can feed my prophet with anything I choose, clean or unclean, likely or impossible. I set the table. The provision does not depend on the source you expect. And then the brook dried up. Of course it did, because Elijah had called down a drought on the whole land, and the prophet who declares the judgment is not exempt from living inside it. The same shut sky that was starving Ahab's kingdom dried the water at Elijah's own feet. And here is where God does something that would have been almost unthinkable to anyone in that world. He tells Elijah to get up and travel north, out of Israel entirely, across the border, into Phoenicia, into the region of Sidon, into the home country of Jezebel herself, into the very heartland of Baal. God sends his prophet to survive the famine in the backyard of the rain god, in the homeland of the queen who is hunting prophets like him. And he sends him to a town called Zarephath, and he tells him, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. Now think about who a widow was in that world. In a society with no safety net, a widow with a child and no husband was among the most powerless, most vulnerable people alive. And this was a widow in a land crushed by the same drought, a foreigner, a Sidonian, a person with no reason to care whether an Israelite prophet lived or died. This is who God chooses as Elijah's provider. Not a king, not a wealthy patron, the poorest, most defenseless person in the enemy's own country. Elijah arrives at the town gate, and there she is, gathering a few sticks, and he asks her for a drink of water, and then, as she turns to get it, he adds, "And bring me a piece of bread." And she stops. And what she says back to him is one of the most quietly heartbreaking lines in the whole book. She says, "As surely as the Lord your God lives, I don't have any bread. All I have is a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I'm gathering these few sticks right now to go home and cook one last meal for my son and myself so that we can eat it and then die." That is the situation. She is not holding back a hidden pantry. She is at the absolute end. One handful of flour, one splash of oil, one final meal, and then starvation. She has done the math on her own death and the death of her child, and she is collecting firewood to cook the last thing they will ever eat. And Elijah looks at this woman at the end of everything and asks her to give him the first portion. It sounds monstrous until you hear the whole thing, because he says, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you said. But first make a small loaf of bread for me, and then make something for yourself and your son. Because this is what the God of Israel says, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain on the land." And she does it. This foreign widow, this powerless woman in Baal's own country, takes the prophet at his word and gives away her last meal on the promise of a God who is not even her own. And the flour does not run out. The oil does not run dry. Day after day after day, she reaches into a jar that should have been empty after one meal, and there is always enough. For her son, and for Elijah. Through the whole rest of the drought, that little jar of flour feeds 3 people and never empties. Do you see what God is doing? Baal is the god of grain and oil and harvest. Baal is supposed to be the one who fills the storehouse. And here, in the middle of Baal's own territory, during a famine Baal cannot end, it is the God of Israel who makes flour and oil appear out of nothing day after day in the hands of a starving foreign widow. The public showdown on the mountain hasn't happened yet, but the private verdict is already in. The real Lord of the harvest has been quietly feeding 3 people in Zarephath the whole time. And then the lesson goes deeper into the one territory Baal was most feared for. Death itself. The widow's son gets sick, he gets worse, and he dies. The boy stops breathing, and the woman who gave away her last meal now holds her dead child, and she turns on Elijah in her grief. What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come here to remind God of my sin and to kill my son? Her faith collapses into raw agony. The miracle of the flour means nothing now. Her boy is dead in her arms, and Elijah says, "Give me your son." He takes the dead child from her, carries him up to the room where he was staying, lays him on the bed, and cries out to God with a kind of anguished honesty that is startling from a prophet. "Lord my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I am staying with by killing her son?" And then he stretches himself out over the body of the boy 3 times and prays, "Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." And the life returns. The boy breathes. Elijah carries him back down and puts him, alive, into his mother's arms and says, "Look, your son is alive." And the widow says the words the whole sequence has been building toward. "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is truth." This is the first time in the entire Bible that a dead person is raised back to life. And of all the places it could have happened, of all the people it could have happened to, it happens in a Phoenician town to the son of a foreign widow through the God that Jezebel is trying to erase. Because Baal, in the myths of his own worshippers, was a god who supposedly died and rose with the seasons, a god tangled up with death and fertility and the cycle of the year, and the God of Israel just walked into Baal's homeland and demonstrated the real thing, not a myth about death and returning, actual power over an actual dead child, quietly, for an audience of one grieving mother, long before the fire ever falls on Carmel. And notice, one more time, who God keeps reaching for. Not the palace and not the powerful, but a widow, a foreigner, a starving outsider with nothing. All through this story, the crown is chasing Baal and hunting the faithful, and God keeps showing up in the caves and the border towns, among the powerless people the regime doesn't even see. That contrast is the whole moral engine of the book. The palace of ivory is full and empty. The widow's house is empty and full. 3 years pass like this. 3 years of drought, of hiding, of quiet miracles at the edges of the world. And back in the center, in Samaria, the kingdom of Ahab and Jezebel is dying of thirst. The famine becomes severe. And then, finally, the word of the Lord comes to Elijah again. "Go, present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land." The hiding is over. It is time to come back and finish it. And when we return to Samaria, we get a small scene that shows just how far the mighty have fallen. The famine is so bad that King Ahab himself, the ruler of the ivory palace, is out searching the land, not for the prophet, but for grass. Literally, for grass, anywhere, by any spring or valley, enough to keep his horses and mules alive so he doesn't lose them all. He splits the territory with his palace administrator, that same secret believer Obadiah, and the 2 of them go out in different directions to scavenge for a few blades of green in a dying land. The God of rain has reduced the king who worships him to hunting for weeds. And out on the road, Obadiah, the man who hid 100 prophets in caves, looks up, and coming toward him is Elijah. He recognizes him instantly and falls on his face. "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" And Elijah says, "Yes. Go tell your master Ahab that Elijah is here." And Obadiah is terrified because he knows what Elijah is. He says, "If I go and announce you, and then the Spirit of the Lord carries you off to who knows where, and Ahab comes and can't find you, he will kill me. And I have served the Lord since my youth. Don't you know what I did? When Jezebel was killing the prophets, I hid 100 of them in caves and fed them. And now you want me to walk up to the king and say Elijah is here and get myself executed when you vanish." But Elijah swears an oath. "As the Lord lives, I will present myself to Ahab today." And Obadiah goes. And so, after 3 years, the king and the prophet finally stand face to face. Ahab, the most powerful and most evil king in the nation's history. Elijah, the ragged frontier prophet who shut his sky. And Ahab speaks first, and his opening words tell you exactly how the palace has understood this whole disaster. He looks at Elijah and says, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel? You are the one who did this to us. You are the source of the ruin." And Elijah gives him back one of the great reframes in all of Scripture. He says, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house has, by abandoning the commands of the Lord and following the Baals." Sit with that exchange, because it is doing something the whole book has been building toward. The king looks at the man who called down the drought and says, "You are what's wrong with this country." And the prophet answers, "No, the drought is a symptom. You are the disease. You broke the covenant. You imported the foreign gods. You let your wife hunt down the faithful. I am not the trouble. I am the consequence of the trouble. You did this to Israel, and then you blamed the one man who told you the truth." That is the oldest move in the Book of Power. When the reckoning arrives, point at the messenger and call him the problem. And Elijah refuses to accept the label. He hands the blame back to the throne where it belongs. And then he issues the challenge that ends the 3 years of hiding and sets up the confrontation the whole nation will witness. He says, "Now summon all Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. Bring all of them, gather the whole kingdom. Let's settle this in the open in front of everyone. One man against 850, on a mountaintop in front of the entire nation, in the middle of a drought that has been strangling the land for 3.5 years. And the terms of the contest that Elijah is about to propose will strike at the one thing Baal, the storm god, was supposed to command above all else: fire from the sky. And before we climb it, one thing, because we are only halfway up this story. If this is a version of the Bible you were never handed in a church or a classroom, that is exactly what this channel is for. We are going through it book by book, the whole thing, no sanitized version and no safe answers. Subscribe and the next one will find you. Now, to the mountain, the showdown on Mount Carmel, the most dramatic single day in the entire Old Testament, and the moment the God of Israel answers 3.5 years of silence in a way no one standing there will ever forget. This is the day the whole book has been building toward. Everything so far, the golden kingdom, the divided heart, the split, the calves, the bloody staircase, the ivory palace, the purge, the drought, all of it now funnels up onto a single mountaintop for one afternoon. And what happens on Mount Carmel is the most dramatic single scene in the entire Old Testament. So let's walk up the mountain and watch it happen. The whole nation gathers. Ahab summons all Israel and they come, a huge crowd of people who have spent 3.5 years starving under a dead sky, climbing up the slopes of Carmel to see what this confrontation will bring. And Elijah had told Ahab to bring the prophets Jezebel kept at her table, all 850 of them. Now here is a detail most people miss. Elijah summoned the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah. But when the contest actually begins, the text only shows the 450 prophets of Baal stepping up to take it. the Asherah prophets quietly vanish from the account. It's as if, when the moment of real testing came, only Baal's own front line was willing to stand on that line. But the crowd is enormous, and the stakes could not be higher, and standing against all of them is one man. And before Elijah says a single word to the prophets of Baal, he turns and speaks to the people, to the crowd, to the nation caught in the middle. And what he says to them is the line that cuts to the heart of the whole tragedy of Israel. He says, "How long will you keep limping between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, then follow him." And the text says, the people answered him not a word, silence. A whole nation, and not one voice. That silence is the real disease of Israel, laid bare in a single moment. They didn't want to choose. They wanted to keep one foot in the temple and one foot on the pagan hill, to hedge, to wait and see who won, to belong to whichever God turned out to be stronger. It is the same divided heart we watched begin in Solomon, now spread across an entire people. And Elijah's question hangs in the air over all of them. How long are you going to refuse to decide? Because after today, refusing to decide will not be possible anymore. Then Elijah lays out the terms, and the brilliance of it is in the details. He says, "I am the only prophet of the Lord left, but Baal has 450 prophets." He deliberately announces the odds, 1 against 450. He wants it lopsided. He wants there to be no possible way to explain the outcome except one. "Here are the rules," he says. "Bring us 2 bulls. Let the prophets of Baal choose one, cut it up, and lay it on the wood, but light no fire. I will prepare the other, and lay it on the wood, and light no fire. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God, fire." Look at what he chose. Baal is the storm god, the lord of lightning, of the thundercloud, of the fire that falls from the sky. Fire from heaven is supposed to be Baal's signature, the one thing he above all should be able to do. Elijah has not picked some neutral test. He has walked onto Baal's home ground and challenged him to do the exact thing he is most famous for. And the people answer, for the first time all day, "What you say is good." The terms are set. Elijah, generous to the point of taunting, lets the prophets of Baal go first. "You are many," he says. "You choose your bull first, and you call first." So they take their bull, and they prepare it, and they begin to call on the name of Baal. From morning until noon they cry out, "Baal, answer us. Baal, answer us." They circle the altar in their limping ritual dance. Hours pass, and the text gives its verdict in 5 flat words. But there was no response, and at noon, Elijah begins to mock them. And it is one of the most savage and honestly one of the funniest passages in the entire Bible. He calls out to them, "Shout louder, surely he is a god." Maybe he's deep in thought, maybe he's busy, maybe he's off on a journey somewhere, or maybe he's sleeping and somebody needs to wake him up. The prophet stands there and openly ridicules their God to their faces in front of the whole nation. Perhaps your almighty storm god has wandered off. Perhaps he stepped away to relieve himself. Shout louder, maybe he'll hear you. And it works them into a frenzy. They shout louder. And they do the thing that reveals the true nature of their religion. They take swords and spears, and they slash themselves, cutting their own arms and bodies until the blood pours down, because they believe that their own pain, their own blood, will force their God to finally pay attention. This is the heart of Baal worship laid bare, a God who has to be bribed with human suffering, who might be moved if only you hurt yourself enough. And they rave on, hour after hour, bleeding, screaming, dancing, all through the afternoon, past the time of the evening sacrifice. And the text delivers the most devastating line of the whole day. There was no response, no one answered, no one paid attention. That is the cold open of this entire video, paid off in full. 850 prophets, 6 hours of screaming, the self-inflicted blood running down their arms, and above them the sky stays blue and empty and utterly silent. The God of storm and fire has nothing, not a spark, not a whisper, Nothing. And then Elijah says, "Come here to me." And the whole crowd shifts toward him. And now, after letting Baal's side exhaust itself into humiliation, Elijah does not rush. He builds. First, he repairs the altar of the Lord that had been torn down, because even the memory of the true worship had been physically demolished in this land, and he takes 12 stones to rebuild it. 12, one for each of the 12 tribes of Jacob, in a nation split into 2 kingdoms, 10 tribes on one side and 2 on the other. At war with each other, Elijah quietly reassembles all 12 into one altar. He is making a statement in stone. Whatever the politics have done, in the eyes of God, there is still one Israel. Then he digs a trench around the altar. He arranges the wood. He cuts the bull and lays it on the wood. And then he does the thing that turns this from a contest into a demonstration. He says, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and the wood." And they do. "Do it a second time," he says. They do it again. Do it a third time. 12 jars of water poured over the sacrifice and the wood and the stones, until the whole thing is soaked and dripping and the trench around the altar is filled to the brim. Understand what that means. This is the 4th year of a catastrophic drought. Water is the single most precious substance in the entire kingdom. People are dying for lack of it. And Elijah takes 12 jars of it and pours it out onto the altar until everything is drowned. He is deliberately making his own task impossible. There will be no hidden spark, no trick, no smoldering coal. Anything that burns this altar now has to overcome soaked wood, wet stones, and a moat of standing water. He has stacked the impossible on top of the impossible, so that when it happens, there is only one explanation left. And then, at the time of the evening sacrifice, Elijah steps forward and prays. And here is the contrast that says everything. The prophets of Baal screamed for 6 hours, cut themselves, danced, raved. Elijah says about 30 seconds of quiet words. "Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back to you again." That's it. No screaming, no blood, no frenzy. A servant asking his God to reveal himself, not for the prophet's glory, but so that a divided nation might finally come home. And then the fire falls. The text says the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the sacrifice and the wood and the stones and the soil, and it licked up the water in the trench. Read that again. It did not just light the wood. It consumed the sacrifice, incinerated the wood, burned up the stones themselves, scorched the very dirt, and evaporated the standing water in the trench, all in an instant. Nothing was left. A blast of heat so total that it devoured the altar, the ground, and the moat around it down to nothing. If that image feels familiar, it should. Because this is the same God who, generations earlier and 100 miles to the south, rained fire out of the sky on the cities of the plain until there was nothing left but a scar in the earth. Fire that consumes the sacrifice, the stones, the ground, and the water down to the dust. The God of Israel has a signature, and it is not one Baal could ever counterfeit. And the nation that had stood in stubborn silence a few hours before, refusing to choose, now falls. The whole crowd drops to the ground, faces in the dirt, and they cry out, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." And here is the beautiful thing hidden in that shout. The name Elijah means, in Hebrew, "My God is the Lord. Yahweh is my God." So when the whole nation falls down crying, "The Lord is God, the Lord is God," they are shouting the meaning of the prophet's own name back into the sky. The one man who stood alone all day has just turned a silent, hedging nation into a crowd confessing his God with their faces in the dust. The limping between two opinions is over. They chose. And then comes the reckoning. Elijah orders, "Seize the prophets of Baal. Don't let a single one escape." And the crowd takes them, and they are brought down to the Kishon Valley, and there they are put to the sword. It is grim, and it is meant to be. This is the same clergy that ate at Jezebel's table while she hunted the prophets of the Lord through the caves. The purge that Jezebel began is now turned back on the ones who carried it out. The state cult that killed the faithful is, in a single afternoon, destroyed at the foot of the mountain where its God failed to answer. But the day is not over, because the whole point of Elijah's return was rain. And now Elijah turns to Ahab, the beaten king, and says something strange. "Go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain coming. There is no rain yet, the sky is still empty, but Elijah can already hear it." And then Elijah climbs to the top of Carmel, and he bends down to the ground, and he puts his face between his knees in a posture of intense, laboring prayer. And he sends his servant to look out toward the sea. "Go, look." The servant goes and comes back. "There's nothing." "Go again," Elijah says. "Nothing." 7 times he sends him. 6 times the servant returns and says, "The sky is clear, the sea is empty, there is nothing." And Elijah keeps praying, face to the ground. And on the 7th time, the servant comes back and says, "There is a cloud, as small as a man's hand, rising out of the sea." That's all. One small cloud, the size of a fist held up against the horizon. And Elijah knows. He sends word to Ahab immediately. "Hitch up your chariot and get down the mountain before the rain stops you." And the sky goes black. The wind rises, the clouds pile up, and a heavy rain comes crashing down on the land for the first time in 3.5 years. The drought is broken. The sky that Baal could not open, the God of Israel, opens with a single small cloud and a heavy downpour, exactly as Elijah said from the top of the mountain before there was anything to see. And in the last image of that incredible day, the power of the Lord comes on Elijah, and he tucks his cloak into his belt, and he runs. On foot, in the pouring rain, down the mountain and across the plain, and he outruns the king's chariot all the way to the city of Jezreel. A man in his mountain-worn clothes, running faster than horses, ahead of the king through the storm he called down. It is the absolute summit of his life. He has never been higher. Fire from heaven at his word. A whole nation on its face confessing his God. The prophets of Baal destroyed. The drought broken. The rain falling. And Elijah himself running on pure divine power, ahead of a chariot, exhilarated, unstoppable, victorious in every possible way. He is at the very top of the mountain of his own life, and within 24 hours, this same man is going to be sitting alone under a bush in the desert, exhausted, terrified, and begging God to let him die. That collapse, the crash that comes right after the greatest victory, and what God says to a broken prophet in the sheer silence of a mountain cave, is one of the most human and most surprising things in the entire Bible. And it is where we go next. There is a kind of crash that only happens after a great victory. Athletes know it, soldiers know it. Anyone who has ever poured everything they had into one enormous moment knows it. You give it all, you win, and then the adrenaline drains out and you are left empty, exhausted, and strangely hollow. And the Bible, with a psychological honesty that is centuries ahead of its time, shows us the greatest prophet in the Old Testament falling straight off the summit of his life into exactly that pit. Remember where we left him. Elijah, running on the power of God, outracing a chariot through the rain at the absolute peak of everything. Fire from heaven. A nation reclaimed. The drought broken. He has never been stronger. And then Ahab goes home and tells Jezebel everything. How Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal. How he had them all killed. And Jezebel does not repent. She does not fear. She sends Elijah a single message, and it is pure ice. She swears by her gods, "May they destroy me if by this time tomorrow I have not made your life like the life of one of those dead prophets. In other words, by tomorrow you will be as dead as the men you killed." And the man who called down fire from heaven, who faced 850 enemies without flinching, reads that message, and he is afraid, and he runs. Think about that. Yesterday, alone against a nation. Today, one threatening text from the Queen, and he bolts. He runs south, out of the northern kingdom entirely, all the way down through Judah to Beersheba, at the very edge of the desert. He leaves his servant there and walks a full day alone into the wilderness. And he sits down under a solitary broom tree, and he asks to die. "I have had enough, Lord," he says. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." The greatest prophet in the story, wanting to be dead, not out of drama, out of total exhaustion, out of the crushing loneliness of feeling like he did everything, gave everything, and nothing changed, because Jezebel is still on the throne and still hunting him, and the whole impossible weight of it just collapses on him at once. And here is where the story does something you might not expect. God does not rebuke him. God does not say, "How dare you be afraid after what I did on that mountain?" God does not lecture the burned-out, suicidal prophet about his lack of faith. Instead, an angel comes and touches him gently while he sleeps under the tree and says, "Get up and eat." And there is fresh bread and a jar of water. Elijah eats and lies back down. And the angel comes a second time, touches him again, and says something so tender it almost doesn't sound like the Bible. "Get up and eat, because the journey is too much for you." Before God says a single word about the mission, or the fear, or what comes next, he lets his prophet sleep, and he feeds him twice. Rest and bread and water. God tends the body of a broken man before he addresses the soul. If you have ever been at the bottom, that detail is worth holding on to. Sometimes the most spiritual thing in the world is a meal and a nap. And then, strengthened by that food, Elijah travels 40 days and 40 nights deep into the desert until he comes to Horeb, the mountain of God, Sinai. The very mountain where, centuries earlier, Moses had met God and received the law. Elijah goes all the way back to the beginning, to the founding mountain of the whole faith, and he finds a cave, and he goes inside. And the word of the Lord comes to him with a question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah pours out his heart, and it is all despair. "I have been zealous for you," he says, "but the Israelites have abandoned your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. I am the last one. It's just me, and they want me dead. I alone am left." That is the lie at the center of his despair. And God is about to correct it. But first he shows Elijah something. "Go out and stand on the mountain," God says, "for the Lord is about to pass by." And a great and powerful wind tears through the mountains and shatters the rocks. But the text says, "The Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a sound." The old translations call it a still, small voice. The most literal rendering is something like a sound of thin silence, a gentle whisper, a quiet so soft it is almost nothing. And when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face, because he knew that this, the whisper, was God. Sit with what just happened, because the timing is everything. Elijah just came down off Mount Carmel, where God answered with spectacular fire, with the most dramatic display imaginable. And now, at the lowest point of his life, God deliberately sends the wind, the earthquake, and the fire, all the big, loud, Carmel-style displays, and says, "I am not in those." Then he speaks in a whisper. God is recalibrating his exhausted prophet. "The fireworks are real, but they are not where I live. Do not mistake the spectacle for me. When you are broken and alone in a cave, I do not come as an earthquake. I come as a whisper you have to go quiet to hear." And in that whisper, God corrects the lie. "Elijah, you are not the only one left. I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, every knee that has not bowed to Baal. 7,000. Elijah thought he was the last faithful man alive, and God tells him there are 7,000 others he never knew about. Remember Obadiah's 100 prophets hidden in the caves? Multiply that. The remnant is always larger than the despairing heart believes. Elijah's loneliness was not just painful, it was factually wrong. He was never alone. And then God does the kindest thing he can do for a burned-out servant. He gives him a future, and he gives him help. He hands Elijah 3 assignments that will outlive him. Go and anoint Hazael as king over Aram. Anoint Jehu as king over Israel, and anoint Elisha to be the prophet who takes your place. 3 names, 3 instruments of judgment that will, in time, bring down the house of Ahab completely. And notice the 3rd one. God gives the exhausted prophet a successor. You will not carry this alone, and you will not carry it forever. The mission is bigger than you. It does not depend only on you. And here is the man who will pick it up when you set it down. And Elijah goes, and he finds Elisha, a young man plowing a field with 12 yoke of oxen. And Elijah walks up and throws his own cloak over Elisha's shoulders and keeps walking. And Elisha understands instantly. He runs after Elijah and asks only to go and kiss his mother and father goodbye first. And then he does something total. He takes his yoke of oxen, slaughters them, builds a fire out of his own plowing equipment, cooks the meat and gives it to the people to eat. He burns the tools of his old life. There is no going back to the farm now. The plow is ashes and the oxen are dinner. And then he follows Elijah and becomes his attendant. The mission has its next generation. So Elijah is restored, fed, corrected, no longer alone, with a helper at his side and a plan that reaches beyond his own life. And now the story turns back to the palace, to Ahab and Jezebel, for the crime that finally seals their doom, and it is almost mundane, not a war, not an act of idolatry, but a quarrel over a piece of land, and it becomes one of the most chilling stories of abused power in the entire Bible. There was a man named Naboth who owned a vineyard in Jezreel, right next to one of Ahab's palaces, and Ahab wanted it. He goes to Naboth with what sounds like a fair offer. Sell me your vineyard so I can make it a vegetable garden since it's close to my house. I'll give you a better vineyard for it, or if you prefer, I'll pay you what it's worth. And Naboth says no. But listen to why he says no, because it matters. He says, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers." This is not stubbornness or greed. Under the law of Israel, ancestral land was not really a commodity to be bought and sold. It was a sacred trust, passed down through the family, tied to the tribe, held from God himself. Naboth is not being difficult, he is being faithful. He is refusing to treat as merchandise the thing God's law told him to hold as a trust. He is the one man in this scene doing the right thing. And Ahab, the king of Israel, ruler of an empire, goes home and throws a tantrum. The text says he lay down on his bed, turned his face to the wall, and refused to eat, sulking, like a child denied a toy because one honest man would not hand over his grandfather's land. And in walks Jezebel. And she looks at her pouting husband and says, "Are you not the king of Israel? Get up, eat something, cheer up. I will get you Naboth's vineyard." And what she does next is the darkest use of power in the whole book, because she does not simply send soldiers to kill Naboth. That would be crude. That would be obviously murder. Instead, she uses the law itself as the murder weapon. She writes letters in Ahab's name. She seals them with the royal seal so they carry the full authority of the throne. And she sends them to the elders and nobles of Naboth's own city with precise instructions. Proclaim a day of fasting, a solemn religious assembly. Seat Naboth in a prominent, honored place at the front. Then set 2 worthless men, 2 false witnesses, opposite him, and have them accuse him of cursing God and the king, and then take him out and stone him to death. Look at every layer of that. She calls a religious fast, an act of piety, as the stage. She convenes a proper assembly with the city's respected elders presiding. She uses the exact number of witnesses the law requires for a capital case, 2, because 1 was not enough to convict. She dresses the whole thing in the robes of justice and religion and due process, and underneath the robes, it is a premeditated murder to steal a man's land. She did not break the law to kill Naboth. She used the law to kill Naboth. She made cruelty look completely, unimpeachably legal. If that pattern sounds familiar, it should, Because we saw its ancestor much earlier in this larger story of the Bible, in the cities of the plain, where a whole society learned to codify its selfishness, to build a legal system whose purpose was to protect the powerful and crush the vulnerable, to make injustice look like order. This is that same disease, now operating at the highest level of the state. The genius of true evil is almost never brute force. It is making the machinery of law and religion serve the powerful and devour the innocent, so that when the vineyard is stolen and the honest man is dead, every box has been checked and every procedure followed. And the elders of the city do exactly as the letters command. They proclaim the fast. They seat Naboth in the place of honor. The two hired liars stand up and swear that Naboth cursed God and the king. And the honest man, the one person in the whole affair who feared God, is dragged outside the city and stoned to death on the strength of a lie signed with the king's own seal. And Jezebel, hearing that it is done, walks to her husband and says, "Get up and take possession of the vineyard. Naboth is dead." And Ahab gets up and goes down to walk through his new garden, standing on the stolen ground of a murdered man. And that is where Elijah is waiting for him. God sends the prophet with a word, and the confrontation is one of the great collisions in Scripture. Elijah meets Ahab in the very vineyard he just seized, and Ahab says, "So you have found me, my enemy." And Elijah says, "I have found you, because you have sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord." And then Elijah pronounces the sentence, and it is terrifyingly specific. He says, "In the place where dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, dogs will lick up your blood, yours. Disaster is coming on your house. Every male of your line will be cut off. Your house will become like the house of Jeroboam and the house of Baasha, wiped out completely, because you provoked God to anger and made Israel sin. And of your wife, the architect of it all, the word is even more gruesome. Dogs will devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel." Hold every detail of that sentence, because the entire rest of this story and the story that follows it exists to fulfill it, one horrifying clause at a time. The dogs, the blood, the specific place, the wall of Jezreel. It is all going to come true exactly, and some of it not for years. But then something genuinely surprising happens, and it tells you something important about the God of this book. When Ahab hears the sentence, he breaks. He tears his clothes, puts on rough sackcloth, fasts, and goes about subdued and mourning. The most evil king in Israel's history actually humbles himself. And God notices. God says to Elijah, "Do you see how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself, I will not bring the disaster in his lifetime. I will bring it on his house in the days of his son." There it is again, the same pattern we saw all the way back with Solomon. The judgment is real, and it is certain, but because of a genuine, if shallow, moment of humility, it is delayed, pushed one generation down the line. Even Ahab, even the worst of them, when he lowers himself, buys a deferral. It is a stunning glimpse of how ready this God is to relent at the smallest sign of a bent knee. But it is a deferral, not a cancellation. The debt still stands. It has just been scheduled for later, and so the fuse is lit with a precision that is almost unbearable to read. Dogs, blood, a specific spot, a doomed dynasty. The word has been spoken. Now watch the machinery of that word grind into motion, because it is going to come true through a foreign war, a lone prophet nobody wanted to hear, a king who tried to cheat his own fate with a disguise, and a single arrow fired by a nameless soldier who was not even aiming, that finds the one gap in a king's armor. And it is here in these wars that the kings of this book step fully out of the pages and into the stone monuments of the ancient world. That is where we go next. A sentence has been spoken over Ahab. Dogs will lick your blood. Your house will be destroyed. And now, we watch the most powerful king in Israel's history spend his final years doing everything in his power to escape that word, using armies, treaties, disguises, and cunning. And we watch the word find him anyway, through the one weapon nobody aimed. This is the part of the book where you learn that you cannot outrun a prophecy. You can only choose how much of your dignity you lose trying. But first, the wars. Because it is in these wars that Ahab finally steps off the page of the Bible and into the hard stone of the archaeological record. The great threat to the north in this era was the kingdom of Aram, centered on Damascus, ruled by a king named Ben-Hadad. And Ben-Hadad marched on Samaria with a coalition of 32 allied kings and laid siege to Ahab's capital. And he sent messengers with demands that were pure humiliation. Your silver and your gold are mine. Your best wives and children are mine. Ahab, cornered, agreed to submit. But then Ben-Hadad pushed further. Tomorrow my men will come and ransack your palace and your officials' houses and take whatever they please. And that was too much even for a beaten Ahab. The elders of Israel told him, "Do not agree to this." So Ahab refused. And here is a detail that tells you something profound about the God of this book. Even now, even to Ahab, the worst king in the nation's history, the man building temples to Baal, the husband of Jezebel, God sends help. A prophet comes to Ahab and promises him victory and says why. So that you will know that I am the Lord. God is still trying to reach even this king, still willing to demonstrate himself, still leaving the door open. And Israel, badly outnumbered, routs the massive Aramean army, and Ben-Hadad barely escapes on a horse. The prophet warns Ahab they will be back next spring, so prepare, and they come back. And this time the Arameans have a theory about why they lost. They tell each other, "The God of Israel is a God of the hills. That is why they beat us in the hill country. So let us fight them down on the flat plain, where their mountain God has no power, and we will win." So they draw Israel into battle on the level ground. And God sends word to Ahab again. Because the Arameans have said the Lord is a God of the hills and not of the valleys, I will hand this whole vast army over to you, and you will know that I am the Lord. Everywhere, in the hills and the valleys both, there is no ground where I am not God. And Israel destroys the Aramean army a second time. Ben-Hadad surrenders and begs for his life. And Ahab, instead of executing the man, spares him, calls him my brother, and cuts a trade deal with him. And a prophet immediately confronts Ahab with an acted-out parable and delivers a chilling verdict. Because you have let go the man I had marked for destruction, your life will be taken in place of his life, and your people in place of his people. Ahab set free the very man God had condemned. And so another sentence is added to the pile already hanging over his head. The debts are stacking up. Now, the Bible tells this story to make a spiritual point about Ahab. But step outside the Bible for a moment, into the records of the empire that would eventually swallow this whole region, and you find Ahab from a completely different angle, because there is an Assyrian monument carved on the orders of the Emperor Shalmaneser III that describes a huge battle fought at a place called Karkar, right in this era. In that battle, a coalition of local kingdoms banded together to stop the Assyrian war machine, and the inscription lists the members of that coalition and the forces each one brought, and there, carved into Assyrian stone, is the name Ahab the Israelite. And the monument says Ahab contributed 2,000 chariots to the alliance. 2,000 chariots. That was one of the largest chariot forces in the entire coalition. To the greatest military empire on earth, Ahab was not a footnote and not a weakling. He was a serious regional power, a warlord commanding one of the biggest armored forces in the Near East, important enough to be named individually in the war annals of an emperor. It is the same lesson we learned with his grandfather Omri. By the world's scoreboard, the one that measures chariots and conquests, Ahab was a heavyweight. By the Bible's scoreboard, the only one it cares about, he was the worst king Israel ever had. The stone remembers his power, the text remembers his heart, and the two records side by side prove the same thing from opposite directions. These were real kings, fighting real wars, in a real place. The people in this book left their names in the monuments of their enemies, and now we come to the last battle, and the death of Ahab, and it is a masterpiece of dramatic irony. There were 3 years of peace between Israel and Aram, and then Ahab decided he wanted to take back a border town called Ramoth-Gilead, which Aram still held. And at that moment, the king of Judah, the good southern king Jehoshaphat, came for a visit. and Ahab asked him to join the war. Jehoshaphat agreed, but he added one condition that reveals the difference between the two kings. First, he said, "Let us inquire of the Lord. Let us find out what God says before we march." So Ahab assembled his prophets, about 400 of them, his court prophets, the professional yes-men, the ones on the payroll, and he asked them, "Shall I go to war against Ramoth-Gilead or not?" And all 400 said the same thing. "Go up. The Lord will give it into your hand, every single one." A unanimous chorus of exactly what the king wanted to hear. One of them, a man named Zedekiah, even made himself a pair of iron horns and acted it out. "With these you will gore the Arameans until they are destroyed." And Jehoshaphat, listening to 400 prophets all singing the same convenient song, is not satisfied. He senses something is off. And he asks the question that exposes the whole rotten setup. Is there not still a prophet of the Lord here that we could ask? Isn't there one more? One who isn't on the payroll? And Ahab's answer is one of the most self-condemning lines any king ever spoke. He says, "There is one more, a man named Micaiah, son of Imlah, but I hate him, because he never prophesies anything good about me, only bad." Read that again. The king admits out loud that he keeps 400 prophets who tell him what he wants, and that there is exactly one who tells him the truth, and that he hates that one precisely because he tells the truth. Ahab has perfectly diagnosed his own doom and cannot feel it. He has surrounded himself with lies on purpose, and he resents the single voice that will not lie to him. They send for Micaiah, and the messenger who fetches him leans in and coaches him on the way. "Look, all the other prophets are predicting success. Just agree with them. Say something good." And Micaiah answers, "As surely as the Lord lives, I will say only what the Lord tells me to say." He comes before the two kings on their thrones with the 400 prophets in full cry, and Ahab asks him the question. And Micaiah at first gives him back the exact chorus, dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, go up and triumph. The Lord will give it into your hand." And it is so obviously mockery that Ahab himself snaps at him. "How many times do I have to make you swear to tell me nothing but the truth in the name of the Lord?" So Micaiah tells him the truth, and it comes in two visions. First he says, "I saw all Israel scattered on the hills, like sheep without a shepherd. And the Lord said, these people have no master. Let each one go home in peace. Sheep with no shepherd, an army with no king. Ahab, he is telling you, you are going to die, and your leaderless soldiers are going to scatter home." And then Micaiah pulls back the curtain on something staggering. He describes a vision of the heavenly court, the Lord sitting on his throne with all the host of heaven around him. And God asks, who will entice Ahab into going up to Ramoth-Gilead, so that he will fall there? And the spirits discuss it, and one spirit steps forward and says, "I will do it. I will go and be a lying spirit in the mouths of all his prophets." And God says, "You will succeed, go and do it." Do you understand what Micaiah just did? He told Ahab to his face in front of everyone that the 400 prophets promising him victory are speaking a lie, and that the lie has been permitted from heaven specifically to lure Ahab to the death he has earned. He has been handed the truth about the lie. He has been shown the trap and told it is a trap. There is no clearer warning possible. And of course, Zedekiah, the man with the iron horns, walks up and slaps Micaiah across the face, and Ahab orders Micaiah thrown in prison on bread and water until I return safely. And Micaiah calls out the last line, the one that puts the whole thing on the record. "If you ever return safely, then the Lord has not spoken through me. Everyone here, remember that I said it, and now watch Ahab try to cheat God." Because Ahab believes the prophecy. That is the astonishing thing. He goes to the battle anyway, but he goes trying to outsmart it. He knows the danger is aimed at the king of Israel, so he disguises himself. He takes off his royal robes and dresses as an ordinary soldier, an anonymous man in the ranks, hiding in the crowd of the army. And he tells Jehoshaphat, "You wear your royal robes. Let the king of Judah be the only one who looks like a king on that field. It is cold, and it is clever, and it is cowardly. If the arrow is looking for a king, let it find the other one." And it almost works for a moment. Because the king of Aram had given his chariot commanders one order: do not bother with anyone else. Fight only against the king of Israel. So they see Jehoshaphat in his royal robes and charge him, certain they have found their target. Jehoshaphat cries out, and they realize he is not the king of Israel, and they turn away. Ahab's disguise is holding. The plan is working. The king is safely hidden among his soldiers, indistinguishable, anonymous, safe. And then the text says, "A certain man drew his bow without taking aim, and the arrow struck the king of Israel between the joints of his armor." Between the joints. In the one small gap, the seam where the sections of the armor meet, the single unprotected point. Fired by a soldier who was not aiming at anyone in particular, who did not know he was shooting at the king, who let the arrow fly at random into the mass of the enemy, and out of the whole battlefield, out of every possible trajectory, that unaimed arrow flew to the one disguised man it was never looking for and found the one gap in his armor. The disguise, the cleverness, the cowardice, all of it worthless. You can take off your robes. You cannot take off the word of God. It found him through a random shot fired by a man who never even saw his face. Ahab is mortally wounded, and his death is slow and grim. He has himself propped up in his chariot, facing the Arameans, so the army will not see their king fall and lose heart. And he stands there, held upright, bleeding, all day long, while the battle rages around him. The blood from his wound runs down and pools in the floor of the chariot. And at evening, he dies. And the cry goes through the army, just as Micaiah saw it. Every man to his own town, every man to his own land. The sheep scatter, the shepherd is dead. They carry his body back to Samaria and bury him. And then they take his chariot, soaked with his blood, to the pool of Samaria to wash it. And the dogs came and licked up his blood as it washed into the water. Exactly, the text says, according to the word of the Lord that Elijah had spoken. The dogs, the blood, the word coming true to the letter, years after it was spoken over a stolen vineyard. Now, if you were paying close attention, you will remember that Elijah's sentence pointed specifically to Jezreel, the place where Naboth died. And you will remember that because Ahab humbled himself, God delayed the full disaster to the days of his son. So the dogs and the blood come due here, at Samaria, in Ahab's own death, while the most specific horror, the reckoning at Jezreel, and the gruesome end of Jezebel herself are still waiting down the line, scheduled for the next generation in the book that follows this one. The debt is being paid in installments, but make no mistake, it is being paid, every clause, exactly as spoken. And so the mightiest king in the history of the northern kingdom, the warlord with 2,000 chariots whose name was carved in the annals of Assyria, dies from a random arrow, bleeding out in a chariot, his blood lapped up by dogs in a public pool. Everything he built could not save him. Every scheme to escape the word only delivered him more precisely into it. The book of 1 Kings is almost over now. Ahab is dead. Elijah's work is nearly done. And what remains is to close the account and to step back and look at the whole shape of this thing we have just walked through. Because when you pull the camera all the way back, from Solomon's golden temple to the dogs at the pool of Samaria, you see a single unified story that most people have never seen whole. You see why it happened, you see the pattern underneath it, and you see the astonishing weight of evidence dug out of the ground over the last century and a half that says the whole thing was real. That is where we finish. The verdict of the book and the verdict of the shovel. The book of 1 Kings does not end with a neat conclusion. And that, it turns out, is the point. After Ahab dies, the book closes with two quick portraits, side by side, that sum up the whole divided nation. In the south, in Judah, there is Jehoshaphat, and he is, by the book's own scoreboard, a good king. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He walked in the ways of his father. He tried to rid the land of the worst of the corruption. He is not perfect. The text notes, almost with a sigh, that the pagan high places were still not removed, that the people still sacrificed on the hilltops. Even the good kings could not fully cleanse the divided heart of the nation. But Jehoshaphat is a bright spot, a reminder that the house of David in the south still had men who chose the right scoreboard. And in the north, at the very same moment, the crown passes to Ahaziah, the son of Ahab and Jezebel, and the text's verdict on him is weary and familiar. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He walked in the way of his father and his mother, and in the way of Jeroboam. He served Baal and worshipped him, and provoked the God of Israel, exactly as his father had done. Ahab is dead, and nothing has changed. The son picks up the same idolatry, the same divided kingdom, the same doom right where his father left it. And that is where the book stops, mid-stride, with the fuse still burning. Because think about everything that is left unfinished as the last page turns. Jezebel is still alive, still in her palace, and the word has said dogs will devour her by the wall of Jezreel. And it has not happened yet. The house of Ahab is under a sentence of total destruction, and it still stands. The specific reckoning at Naboth's Jezreel, delayed to the days of Ahab's son, is still waiting to fall. Elijah has not died, and something extraordinary is coming for him. And that deepest, longest fuse of all, the prophecy at Bethel that named a king called Josiah 300 years before his birth, is still at the end of this book, unlit. The book of 1 Kings ends like a held breath. Every debt named, none of the biggest ones yet collected. It is not a conclusion, it is a loaded silence. So let us do the thing almost nobody does. Let us pull the camera all the way back, from the last page to the first, and look at the entire shape of this book at once. Because when you see it whole, you see a single unified story, and it is far more coherent and far more devastating than the pile of disconnected Sunday school lessons most people think it is. It is the story of how the most blessed kingdom on earth destroyed itself from the inside. Watch the pattern, because it repeats at every scale, from one man to the whole nation. It starts with prosperity, real blessing, real success, the golden age. And prosperity breeds pride, and pride breeds compromise, the quiet decision that a little accommodation, a shrine on the hill, a convenient calf, a foreign alliance, will not really cost anything. And compromise breeds forgetting, a slow erosion of loyalty to the God who gave the blessing in the first place. And into that forgetting, every single time, God sends a lone voice. A prophet with no army, no wealth, no protection. Ahijah with his torn cloak. The man of God at Bethel. Micaiah against 400. Elijah against 850. And the nation must choose whether to listen. And mostly, it does not. And then the judgment comes, always delayed, often by a generation, but always, always certain. And underneath that pattern is the single deepest truth of the book. Israel is never conquered before it is corrupted. The rot always comes first, and it always comes from the inside, usually from the throne. The armies of Aram and later Assyria are never the real cause of the fall. They are just the bill collectors, arriving to claim a debt the kingdom ran up against itself. The deadliest enemy of Israel, from the first page to the last, is always Israel. And running all through it are the threads we have watched from the beginning. There is the divided heart. Solomon loved the Lord, and also burned incense on the pagan hills. And that single divided man became a divided kingdom, a whole nation that Elijah found still limping between two opinions on the slopes of Carmel, unwilling to choose. The refusal to decide is the national disease, and it is passed down like an inheritance. There are the two scoreboards. The world measured these kings by chariots and monuments and treaties, and by that measure Omri and Ahab were giants, remembered for a century, carved into the stone of empires. The book measures them by one thing only, the loyalty of the heart, and by that measure the same men rank at the very bottom. And the whole book is quietly insisting that you have been keeping score of the wrong thing your entire life. There is the remnant, always larger than despair believes. Obadiah's 100 prophets hidden in the caves. God's 7,000 who never bowed to Baal. Elijah was certain he was the last faithful man alive, and he was wrong by 7,000. The light gets buried in this book, again and again. It never goes out. There is the astonishing readiness of God to relent. The judgment on Solomon delayed for David's sake. The judgment on Ahab, the worst king of all, delayed the moment he put on sackcloth. This is not a God looking for an excuse to destroy. This is a God who defers the sentence at the smallest sign of a bent knee, who keeps sending prophets even to Ahab, who answers a doubting nation with fire and a broken prophet with a whisper and a meal. And there is the word that never fails. Count them up. Ahijah's prophecy that Jeroboam's house would be wiped out. Fulfilled. The word that Baasha's house would fall the same way. Fulfilled. The drought. Declared and ended on Elijah's word. Fulfilled. The fire on Carmel. The rain from a fist-sized cloud. The dogs and the blood of Ahab. Every single one. Fulfilled exactly. Sometimes years later. Sometimes through a random arrow nobody aimed. The batting average of the prophetic word in this book is perfect, and the deepest prophecy of all, the naming of Josiah 3 centuries early, is going to pay out with the same precision long after this book has ended. That is the mega story of 1 Kings. Kingdoms rise and fall, kings scheme and die, but the word spoken by God arrives, on time, every time, and nothing, not a disguise, not an army, not 300 years, can stop it. That is the verdict of the book. Now here is the verdict of the shovel. Because the natural question, after 2 hours of this, is the one every honest person eventually asks: did any of it actually happen? Or is this a beautifully constructed legend, a theological story dressed up as history? And the remarkable thing, the thing that has quietly transformed this conversation over the last century and a half, is how many of these names have walked straight out of the text and into the solid rock of the archaeological record. Start with Omri, the footnote king. We have the Mesha Stele, the black basalt monument carved by an enemy king of Moab that speaks of Omri, king of Israel, and the house of Omri that oppressed his people. And it names in the same breath the God of Israel and the god Chemosh, an enemy with no reason to flatter, confirming the kingdom, the king, and the gods, exactly as the Bible describes them. Then, his son. On the Kirk monolith, carved by the Assyrian Emperor Shalmaneser, we have Ahab the Israelite, credited with 2,000 chariots at the Battle of Karkar, the most evil king in the Bible, standing in an enemy's war record as a major military power, precisely as his wars in this book imply. And the dynasty outlived the men. For over a century, the Assyrian Empire referred to the entire northern kingdom simply as the House of Omri. On one Assyrian monument, the Black Obelisk, there is an image of a king of Israel named Jehu bowing his face to the ground before the Assyrian emperor, labeled Jehu of the House of Omri. It may be the only surviving contemporary picture of an Israelite king that we possess. And there he is, from the exact world of this book. And the House of David, the southern dynasty that 1 Kings keeps returning to, the family for whose sake God kept delaying judgment again and again. For a long time, skeptics said David was a myth, a legend with no evidence outside the Bible. And then, in the early 1990s, at a site in northern Israel called Tel Dan, archaeologists pulled a broken stone slab out of the ground, an Aramean victory inscription carved by one of Israel's enemies, and on it, in letters cut by a hostile foreign hand, are the words, "The House of David." The first hard external evidence that the dynasty this entire book orbits was a real ruling house, named by its enemies exactly as the text says. Go back to the very start of the split when Jeroboam fled to Egypt to the protection of a king named Shishak, and remember I told you to hold that name. On the wall of the great temple at Karnak in Egypt, the pharaoh we call Shishak carved a record of a military campaign into the land of Israel and Judah, listing the towns he conquered, in exactly the era the Bible places his invasion, the era when the Bible says he marched on Jerusalem and stripped the treasures from Solomon's temple. The pharaoh from the book left his campaign carved in Egyptian stone, and the capital itself. Excavators at Samaria found the royal acropolis Omri founded and Ahab expanded, built of masonry so fine it stands among the best in the region, and buried in it the hundreds of carved ivory fragments that match, piece for piece, the Bible's strange little phrase about Ahab's house of ivory. And at the cities, the book specifically says Solomon fortified Hazor and Megiddo and Gezer. Archaeologists found monumental Iron Age gates and construction, real fortifications at exactly the named sites. Now, I want to be honest with you because you deserve that, and because the truth is strong enough that it does not need to be oversold. Scholars still argue, sometimes fiercely, about the details. They debate the precise dates. They debate how much of a given wall to credit to Solomon versus the later kings of Omri's line. They debate just how large and centralized the early United Kingdom really was. Those debates are real, and they are ongoing. And anyone who tells you every question is settled is selling you something. But notice what that debate is actually about. It concerns scale and chronology and interpretation, not the question of whether these kingdoms existed at all. Because the kings themselves, Omri, Ahab, Jehu, the house of David, and the foreign kings who fought them, are named individually in the monuments of the very enemies who fought and hated them. These are not mythological figures. They are people who left footprints in the stone of the ancient world, and we have found the footprints. So this was real, a real kingdom, real kings, real wars, a real collapse, which means the warning is real too, and this is the last thing, the thing that lifts this book out of ancient history and drops it uncomfortably into your own life, because the prophets who told this story never used it as a window to point at other people. They used it as a mirror. They were not writing an expose of some foreign nation's sins. They were writing to their own people, holding up Solomon and Ahab and the divided kingdom and saying, look, this is what happens, this is the pattern, this is you if you are not careful. And the questions the book forces are not ancient questions. They are the permanent questions of every prosperous, comfortable society, including yours. When you have wealth, do you use it to protect the vulnerable, like the widow in Zarephath, or to insulate yourself from them, like the ivory palace in Samaria? When you build systems, courts, laws, institutions, do you build them to serve justice, or to protect the powerful and devour the honest man with his little vineyard? When the truth is inconvenient, do you keep 400 voices around you that tell you what you want to hear, and quietly hate the one Micaiah who will not lie to you? And when the real choice comes, do you decide? Or do you limp forever between two opinions, 1 foot in the temple and 1 foot on the hill, hoping you never actually have to choose? The kingdom in this book answered those questions, and the valley of Jezreel and the pool at Samaria and the scattered 10 tribes are what the answers cost. But the book ends with the fuse still burning, and so this story is not over, because Elijah has not finished his course, and what happens to him next is one of only 2 times in the entire Bible that a man does not die at all: a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and a whirlwind that takes him straight up into the sky while his successor Elisha watches and cries out. Jezebel is still waiting by her wall, and the dogs are still coming for her, exactly as the word promised. The house of Ahab is about to be scoured off the earth in a single day of blood, and the 10 tribes of the north, the kingdom founded on a golden calf, are marching, generation by generation, toward the day a foreign empire will erase them so completely that we still call them the lost tribes of Israel, gone from history, their fate an argument to this day. That is the story of 2 Kings, and it is even darker than this one. If you want to know how the fire took Elijah, how the word finally caught Jezebel, and how a kingdom that survived everything you have watched tonight finally vanished off the map, that video is on your screen right now. Subscribe and stay with me, because we are going through the whole story, one book at a time. No sanitized version, no safe version, just the actual text and the actual evidence and the questions both of them refuse to let us avoid. I'll see you in the next one.